Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Starting with just a couple of comments. One, I want to associate myself with Senator Rubio's question, which I think is the real key question of this hearing. What can we do to defend ourselves? And I'd like to ask each of you, you've already testified, talked about it, to submit a written, very short, half a page, bing, 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 here are the 5 things that we can do to defend ourselves. I think that would be very helpful. Secondly, what we are seeing here, it seems to me, is the invention and expansion and implementation of a new kind of warfare. And it's a kind of warfare that is particularly effective against democracies. Valery Gerasimov, who's the chief of the General Staff of Russia, calls it weaponizing information, and said in 2013 that he believes we are engaged now in informational conflict. Putin's defense budget is 1/8 of ours, but he is playing a weak hand very well and has found a cheap way, and when I say peculiarly effective against democracies, because this is where public opinion matters. In many other countries, public opinion doesn't have that great a role in how policy is formed. So a couple of short questions, and I think, Ambassador Burns, you just answered this. Any doubt that RT is an arm of the Russian government? No doubt. Everybody agrees. Secondly, I had heard in a previous hearing in a different committee that the Russians were looking around, sniffing around, buying commercial TV outlets in Europe. Have any of you heard of that? Is that?
Yes, there have been in Baltic states the cases where they've tried, but governments have tried to block these possibilities.
Well, that certainly, it seems to me, is one of the things that we have to watch. Another, I think this is a yes or no question, was what was done here in 2016 absolutely consistent with what the Russians have been doing in Europe for some years? It was essentially the same modus operandi. Mr.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it was, but there were a number of new elements and some more risk-taking than we've used to see.
So they're getting more sophisticated. Is that accurate? I think, Mr. Starch, you have said something several times that's consistent with my understanding. Some members of this committee were in Eastern Europe over a year ago, in the spring of 2016. We were in Ukraine and Poland. When we asked them how and the first thing they wanted to tell us is, watch out for the Russians in your elections. And we didn't understand how prescient that was at the time. But in any case, then we said, how do you defend yourself? And the answer was, I think exactly what you said. They said the best defense is if the people know what's happening and they can say, oh, it's just the Russians. And that you've characterized as societal awareness. And that's what I think is one of the most important roles of this committee, is to educate the American people that whatever we do, whatever defenses we come up with, this is going to keep happening. And the best defense is for them to be, I think you used the word digitally literate, or I can't recall the term, but we need to understand that they're going to keep doing this, and we need to learn to shrug it off. Ambassador Burns, do you have any thoughts on that?
I very much agree, and I think that's the lesson to learn from what happened to the Obama administration. They were caught unawares. It was new. They didn't appreciate the extent of it, and it was a lack of speed and lack of transparency.
I do think it should be noted, because there's been some discussion here, they did release on October 9th a comprehensive memo that this was going on, that really listed all the elements that were later listed in the January, and in the heat of the campaign, nobody paid much attention to it. But, and I understand, I think the dilemma they had was, do we go public in a big way and be accused of putting our thumb on the scale of the election and those kind of things? But I agree, I think a more aggressive response would have been appropriate in 2020 hindsight. One thing that hasn't been mentioned too much is the use of compromise. Is that not part of the Russian strategy, use of salacious material against candidates they don't like? That has happened in other countries, has it not?
Well, it's one of the open questions about the 2015 Bundestag leak, the German federal legislature, whether they were looking for compromat and found it. They have not posted anything yet, but you know that's kind of the James Bond version. They may just have also have done this for the simple purpose of espionage. The point about compromat is that often you don't find out because you're not supposed to.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Just compromat has been very heavily used typically by USSR. I think the relative importance has decreased because they've learned actually having one is not always essential. You might make it up.
Oh, I see. You don't even have to have the data. You can just make something up. King kicks dogs every morning, and then I'm denying it for the next 3 months, or much worse. Well, I want to thank you again for your testimony. This has been very informative, and I hope you will give us some written responses about defenses, because that's an important role of this committee to prepare ourselves for what everyone has suggested is not a one-off in 2016. It will continue to happen, and it will continue to happen on both sides of our political divide in this country. Putin is not a Republican. He is an opportunist. And the next time, this attack could come in the opposite direction, but it's still a corruption of our democracy. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.